Hello everybody, in today's video, and I know I'm not doing the IRL movement right now. I mean, I am, but I'm not. You know what I mean? Like, what's the word for it? If there's a word for it. Basically, I'll get to it eventually, or I'll get back to it eventually, but I don't want to make it all my content is. I just want to make it like a part of it, you know? Where I can still do daily posts, but also still be the founding father of the IRL movement. Now, it's one of those movements that, on its own, doesn't really need my help once it gets big enough, you know? But it's not a guarantee how big it will be, you know? Like, I'm the founder, but whoever keeps that movement alive and keeps like uploading content and stuff like that for those kind of things specifically, then it's not gonna really need me anymore. You know, I gotta check something. Gotta make sure. Okay, we're good. We're good. Alright. Anyway, don't worry, I'll get back to that soon. I'm just gonna be talking about whatever. You know? Yeah, my legs hurt. You know? My legs still hurt because yesterday I did a lot of walking. A lot of walking. Okay? About 5 to 15 miles worth of walking. Probably 20 miles worth of walking. In other words, a lot. A lot. And I'm probably not gonna be doing my daily walks and stuff like that for like a couple of days, maybe even a couple of weeks, because it's just so hard on my legs, you know? It sucks. It really does. And even if I were to say get as big as Mr. Beast in terms of subscribers, likes, views, and comments, and shares, and stuff like that. The issue with that is, well, I would be really, really big. Now, don't get me wrong, I would still like to have like a bunch load of subscribers or whatever, like Mr. Beast does. But probably not to the same extent, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be Michael Jackson type of popular, if you know what I mean. Like, I still want to be famous and stuff like that, but like, be that kind of popular where, you know, everybody and nobody knows you at the same time. Not exactly great. But don't get me wrong, again, I still want that attention. I'm just not that extremely interested into it, you know? But if you want to be that big or go that far, then that's up to you, not me. You know? I'm just simply just a YouTuber. You know? That's how it is. Man. I was on the bed yesterday, and and it was just hurting. And hurting. But I guess that's what happens when you take a walk for too long. So my legs are still mostly healing up. I can still walk, I can still stand and stuff like that. It's just, it hurts a little whenever I do it, you know? So it really does suck. And when it comes to hurting yourself or like shaming people, the big three would be age, makeup, and bras. Bras are one of those things where it's like, it never really made too much sense for women specifically to be having them on, you know? I feel like the only real reason why bras are even still a thing is not because it actually provides benefits, but it's mostly just because other women shame women into wearing that kind of stuff, you know? So it really makes you think, you know? Like, it really does. It really fucking does. And then there's age, but you have to get used to getting older. Like, I'm making my channel intentionally in such a way where people can get used to me getting older, you know? Where, like, me getting older and me changing over time is one of those things where it's like, because of the way I make my channel, I don't really have to worry about, oh, I have to stay at this specific age, or I have to grow up to be this specific age. You know what I mean? Like, some people make content that is like pretty much exclusively for whatever age range they're working in. And even if I were to work in a specific age range, I would do it in such a way where I can age. You know, I can get older. That kind of thing. But there's no specific age you really have to be. As long as you're an adult, generally speaking, I don't really mind, you know? Because you could be a young adult, you could be a really old adult. You know, I'm not really a fan of people under the age of 18, you know? And the only real reason why is because of the type of content that I do. And also because it turns comments off a lot. And because I don't want my stuff to get taken down because I wasn't family friendly, if you know what I mean. Like, I could have been clean mouth, done nothing wrong, and I still could get it taken down for not being family friendly. But that's not the type of channel that I do. The type of channel is like, basically, you're just the kind of an adult who likes to watch a guy talk, you know? That's basically what it is. Like a podcast without being a podcast, if that makes sense. You know? And before podcasts were huge, you would have things like, what was it? Dinner with Andre. And back then, because podcasts were mostly still a radio thing, you only had stuff like that, you know? Where it's just two guys talking whatever. If you ask me, that should have been like an hour long, you know? It shouldn't have been like 2 hours or so long, because like I tried to watch it and I fell asleep to it. Like, it's just so exhausting to watch something like that. And I know I keep drinking my water, but like, I'm still mostly physically exhausted from walking yesterday. Oh, and I mean yesterday, I mean the day before this video was uploaded. So I'm probably not going to be posting anything for a while. Like, I'm probably not going to be posting anything for like the next several days. But I will occasionally check in or whatever to see how my YouTube channel is doing. You know? But outside of that, I'm just going to be leaving it alone. You know? Because, well, I want to heal up. I want to, rest. Rest to myself and not worry about the pain as much. But I still want to talk at least for a little while. You know? Sports kind of fell off because now we live in a time where politics is being treated more like sports and sports is being treated more like politics. Like, no, you should be treating politics like it's politics and treating sports like it's sports. Why? Because that's what you're supposed to do. Alright? Sports was one of the last monoculture or pop culture things that people could have. Like, yes, there was controversy to it, but it was like, something you could actually debate about without having to worry about, did he vote for this guy, Like, we gotta make it about this issue, that issue, whatever. Like, at this point, either do one of two things. Either just get out of politics, out of it completely, which I don't think they're gonna do, or just don't make it during those games, just don't make it like a part of the sport. You know what I mean? Especially with like WNBA or basically any female-only league. Not so much male-only leagues because that isn't really a big issue, but it is a problem we have to acknowledge. It is something that does happen within male sports as well. And don't get me wrong, I know there's mixed gendered sports, but unless they start getting basically a Michael Jordan level player, for whatever sport it is, whatever mixed sport it is, then you ain't gonna really get much anything. Or have your own original thing. I don't know, have your own original big player. But you would have to get that type of sport popular, That kind of thing. Because this is professional sports. And in mixed sports, they make the game so that way both genders, being male and female, can both have a fair chance of playing, that kind of thing. And I think they should do that more, with mixed gendered sports. Not so much female only or male only, because one, you wouldn't really have to worry about, hey, is this player gonna be, like, we need all male players or all female players. We can just get a player that's physically fit for the job, So you'd have a bunch more options. That kind of thing, especially in team sports. Not so much, what do you call it? One-player sports, things like that. But when it comes to more like team-based sports, then yeah, I would see that working out. That kind of thing. But yeah, for single-player sports, no. I don't see that really working for, say, boxing or wrestling. If it was single-player sports, Probably something like, I don't know. If you want to have a fighting sport, then I don't know, maybe sword fights. I don't know what you would call that. You know, that kind of thing. But it is whatever it is, you know. But there are many different types of sports and many different types of games, you know. If you ask me, a sport is a physical game that you play where you can get to the point of being physically exhausted. You know, like say basketball. You can get physically exhausted playing a sport like basketball. You know, or baseball. Baseball has been getting really, really popular lately. You know? Like, oh, you want to talk about baseball, huh? Yes, I do. I do. You know, like, people think it's this really, really boring game, but in recent years, they've changed it up. I mean, yeah, if this was, say, pre-2022, I would mostly agree with you. But I'm saying pre-2022 because that's when they started to slowly, and I mean slowly, change up what baseball is. You know? Where even if your team doesn't win, you still get a better game. But don't get me wrong, it's not like they're instantly, more entertaining now. They're still changing up the rules to where it's still baseball. It's just baseball in a way that gets people to actually watch it, you know? That kind of thing. Where it's built, and it should be built for something if, say, I don't know, the internet were to become obsolete. But that sport is mostly associated with men. And most sports are really generally associated with men. But why is this? Well, let's be realistic. Most people who actually, not just make it to the big leagues, but actually play the sport that the leagues that they are in are going to be men, That kind of thing. Whereas for women's sports, even if they join the league, it's not a guarantee that they'll actually play the sport, Because of stuff like politics or whatever. Because they're more focused on the internet clout for political popularity than they actually are for sport, And then similar things happening to documentaries or, say, movies and TV shows that aren't, meant for politics. If this was a political TV show, if this was a TV show about, politics, instead of taking just like some random ass franchise that has nothing to really to do with politics at all, and then thinking, maybe we should do that. Like, there are exceptions, but even the exceptions are still terrible. Like, Indiana Jones is like a very, like, somewhat political heavy franchise, but like the way that they do it, the kind of stuff that they do it, instead of being like, oh, Indiana Jones is running for president or something like that, they could have really done it well, but no, 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 no. They had to make a girl boss, Like, they couldn't make a pass the torch kind of thing. Make a Indiana Jones the second, Like, why can't that be a thing? And it's not just the movies, but it's the TV shows. Like, for example, Star Trek used to be really, really cool. Like, it used to, like, what if you had a civilization that was diverse and as complicated as Earth, but it was meant for a civilization that was really like they come from a society that's meant for, I don't know, basically sports and gaming is like a big thing. Like that's what their society is built off of, you know? Or say a society that is built off of anger, or a society that's built purely off of capitalism, or a society that's purely built off of theocracy, you know? Things like that. And it really, really expanded your mind because it would start off slow. Now, in the original series, it was quite different, but when you get to stuff like, say, Next Generation or, you know, Deep Space Nine or Voyager, that's where it starts to get really cool. And I would say that Star Trek peaked in the 1990s, you know, at least if you're talking in terms of its most popular shows. And I know there were many other shows after that, but they were either sucked or they're long forgotten about. And there was another one that had that guy from Quantum Leap as the captain, but like that, like, unless you get into basically 2000s specific TV shows, you're probably not going to be watching it, you know? Don't get me wrong, it's still a good franchise. But like you don't really see the Star Trek like it used to be, you know? And speaking of Star Entertainment, Star Wars. Star Wars used to be a really big something, you know? And now it's just kind of a joke of itself, and I didn't grow up during the time of when these TV shows or movies were in their peak. The only franchise I got to really see that was in its peak was Marvel. You know? Marvel and DC. Like when they hit their golden age, which was in the 2010s for Marvel, and, you know, recently ended with DC in this decade. Basically, you had, well, for Marvel, you had Endgame, and for DC, you had stuff like The Flash. The Flash was a really, really cool franchise, and so was Arrow. You know, like I have nostalgia for that kind of stuff because I was around for that time and I still somewhat remember it, you know? Don't get me wrong, I don't completely remember it because it was a long time ago, but I remember it just enough that, you know, it still comes to me. But we're at a point where they made so many remakes and so many sequels throughout the late 2010s and the early 2020s that now they're basically just picking up with the cultural and societal leftovers of these movies, TV shows, video games, music, etc. You know? So for the next 5 years, expect Hollywood to basically dissolve, at least in terms of popularity. Like the town will still exist, but it's like, oh, they used to make movies here? Interesting. You know, like it's one of those things where it's like, oh, they used to be big back in the day, you know? Like it's that kind of thing. But right now, it's mostly foreign movies that are really popular. But if you're looking for like movies that are still based in the US that are gaining popularity, like right now it's still like particularly niche because, you know, people are not really watching movies or TV shows as much as they used to. But for the ones who are, you're generally going to get movies from, say, Texas, Virginia, you know, that kind of thing, or Michigan, or New York City, that kind of thing. You know, you're not going to really see many movies come out of, say, Hawaii or California for a long, long time. And if it ever does happen, it's most likely going to be through a situation of like remakes or reboots or sequels. You know, you don't really have a truly iconic character that's original to that decade, you know? Like, yeah, in the 2010s, you could say, oh, but Marvel wasn't based off of an original franchise in the 2010s, you know? But, like, you gotta understand something. The way that they did it was original to its time, you know? And I would say that the only way people would start watching movies and TV shows again is if they're worth the watch, you know? Sports are always one of those parts of monoculture that will always, like, exist, that will always semi-exist, even if all the big companies and all the big sports, you know, were to die off. Say, like, the World Cup, for example, would no longer be a thing, and soccer is no longer a dominant sport in the world. And yes, I'm calling it soccer because that's just the word I prefer to use. I would say that if that were to happen, then whatever sport would take it over would just go with it. You know, like there would never really be an end. You know, like even if you took out the biggest guy, there's still something that's going to replace it. Like Hollywood, really big, really huge. But all you need to do is just replace it. You could get Bollywood, Tollywood, Korea, maybe some parts of Europe, like Poland, perhaps. I don't know. Argentina. That's another one, but I think it's mostly just because of that Violetta show that they had back in the day that got really big. But generally, if it's still in the United States, yeah, places like Texas, Virginia, maybe West Virginia, perhaps. Basically anything that has to do with Florida and then Michigan, you know? And I say Michigan because even though it's not as big or big as a flow for movies, it's still an easier and cheaper place to go, you know, or Indiana or Ohio than, say, California. You know, California or Nevada or New Mexico, you know? I mean, yeah, New Mexico is kind of cheap, but the thing is that they have a lot of crime. You know, like there was an entire really big TV show called Breaking Bad, and if you know anything about that show, you would know New Mexico in that universe and in real life is not exactly the best place to go when you want to make a movie. Unless you're making like a crime movie or something. But I don't know. And speaking of crime and, you know, things like, you know, firefighters or whatever, what is up with Generation X specifically into those kind of TV shows? Like, yeah, the boomers had that kind of stuff, whatever. But, like, at least they had a little bit more diversity with cowboys. You know, like, that was their thing. And then you had the millennials that had stuff like, what was it? Out there with space and whatnot, or the ocean. And then you had Generation Z, which mostly grew up on the internet, so I have really no idea what you could have. And then Generation Alpha will be the first generation not to just grow up with the internet, but be born into the internet. You know, like there is some part of Generation Z that grew up with the internet either in the early days of them growing up or they got it as they were growing up. You know, millennials, the earliest you will see is like somebody who got the internet as they were growing up. You know, that kind of thing. Or later in life. Generation Z is the first generation to really grow up either on the internet or with the internet, you know? And Generation Alpha is going to be the first generation not just to grow up with the internet, but grow on the internet, you know? Like the internet is kind of a part of them at this point. You know, like, I have no idea if they'll make movements like I have with, you know, the in real life movement or the IRL maxing community. You know, I don't know if they'll have things like that because they'll just be so online that they probably won't need it. And the difference between that generation and mine, Generation Z, is that my generation, when something hits the height of its popularity, people usually stop getting into it. Whereas Generation Alpha, as long as it's still popular, they'll still do it, you know? Like, as long as the trend is still on its top, even if it's on the tippy top and it's still going down, there are still people that will still do that. They'll still do that because they don't really give up trends like Generation Z does. Like, for them, once it reaches around the height or is in the height of their popularity, people just give it up. You know, people just stop. That kind of thing. But, on the other hand, when you go to compare it to Generation Alpha, not so much Generation Beta, because they pretty much only just existed now. You know, they were pretty much just born in 2026. So they just basically spawned in for the first time. All they'll really know is the internet. You know, they don't really have an offline life. But don't get me wrong, there are still going to be people who live an offline life in those generations or whatever. And if you're in the distant future watching this, hello. I'm your ancestor probably because, I don't know, maybe I'm dead. Whatever the case. Yeah, that generation doesn't really give up a trend like Gen Z does, where the second it hits its popularity, nobody's into it anymore. Whereas Generation Alpha, if you want them to get into a trend, it has to be like really, really popular, the height of its popularity, you know, and then it just doesn't stop from there, you know. And generally, if you ask me, if you're born past 2009, the year 2009, your Generation Alpha to me, all the way up till 2025, 2026, at least if you're trying to make it in measures of generations. But if you ask me personally, that whole idea of generational type of thing, like boomers, millennials, Generation Z, you know, Generation X, things like, you know, alpha and beta and whatever else. And I don't know, the silent generation, things like that, people like that. It's mostly just a social construct to keep ageism alive. Most people who are generally ageist or like prejudiced against people for being older or younger are generally people who are really young. You know, it's generally people in their teen years or in their early 20s, that kind of thing. Because that's just how it is. But I'm not really one of those people, you know, I don't really hate the boomers per se. Like, yeah, they caused a lot of problems, but like, they're also the boomers. you know? Like, they had it good back in the day for them, you know, for their generation. My generation doesn't really have that. Sorry, we just don't, you know? Like, that's just not a thing. But we did have the internet, so there was that. But the way we use the internet right now, or the way that the internet was used in the video, in the day that the time of this video was released in, yeah, we use it way too much. Okay, it's not as much as, say, 2022, where people were so online that even somebody who was just online was critically online, you know. But it is still an issue that we can't ignore. We can't ignore this issue. But anyways, if you have any thoughts or comments you want to make, you can. Any ideas or any facts you want to know or you have, you know, there's that. But you know, people are really just like stuck online. You know, like, when was the last time you done something that was so offline? Like, you done like a bunch of things so offline that being online was just like, it wouldn't really make sense to explain it on there. Like, when was the last time you just remembered things that were offline in general? You know, like, it's kind of hard, isn't it? You ever think about that? Well, again, anyways, if you have any thoughts, ideas, or whatever you're thinking about, if you want to make a video or whatever about it, you can. It's not like it's illegal. But yeah. Anyways, I think you get the idea. I'm going to end this video. So, thank you to all peoples, from watching this video, regardless of how we are watching it, you know, things like that. Regardless of who you are in the internet or in real life or whatever. I am here, but I am going. So I shall see you guys later. Alright? Alright. Bye-bye.